Human sexuality has been viewed in three different ways in Buddhist traditions. The first way is rejection. This is the view you find in the Pali Canon, in the earliest texts that we have, and it's the view still that generally prevails in southern Buddhism. Here, human sexuality is a source of suffering. In one of the early texts, Gautama scolds a monk who had left his wife to join the Sangha and then gave in to temptation and went back to his wife, and now he comes crawling back and wants to be re-entered into the Sangha. Gautama says to him, quote, "O misguided man, it is better for you to put your penis into the mouth of a hideous poisonous snake than into the body of a woman." End quote. Monks traditionally were supposed to stay separate from women, at least women to whom they're not related. They're not supposed to look at, speak to, or be alone with a woman. And they're to think of every female as a relative, as they would think of a mother, a sister, or a daughter. There's also a practice of meditating on corpses. The human body is a beautiful, enticing, alluring object. A corpse is not. If you meditate on a corpse, that's meditating on the disgusting, hideous nature of a human body. So in one text, Gautama, when he's being tempted by Mara's beautiful daughters, says to them, quote, "You are nothing more than bags of skin filled with blood, pus, and filth." End quote. Well, when you look at it that way, even the most beautiful movie star maybe isn't so inviting. Any kind of sex for a member of the Sangha was forbidden. Yes, even masturbation. Sex with anyone could be grounds for expulsion from the Sangha. But that's not the only attitude towards human sexuality in Buddhism. A number of Mahayana sutras challenged the superiority of the celibate male monk. Sometimes the hero of the story in a Mahayana sutra is a householder, somebody who's married with children, or a teenage girl, or someone like that, someone who's not a male celibate monk. Some of these hold up gender differences as really illusory. So another attitude that you find, especially in Eastern Buddhism and in Japanese Zen, is that it's just irrelevant to enlightenment. I mean, if all your enlightenment depends on is this intuition, is this awareness that nirvana is not different than samsara, or some kind of awareness of your true nature, well, look, what does celibacy have to do with that necessarily? Japanese Zen has priests, some of whom are married. There are celibates, and sometimes there are celibates who sneak out and act in non-celibate ways, and sometimes there are Zen rebels who flout expectations and visit prostitutes. Again, if really there's no difference between samsara and nirvana, it's hard to see why we should be so restrictive about sex. A third attitude about human sexuality is something you see in Northern Buddhism. This is the view that sex can be a powerful tool, which, if used very carefully, can help one to attain enlightenment. This is an idea that seems to come from Tantric Hinduism, which at times suggested that certain sexual practices, even ones that are normally considered to be immoral, could be spiritually advancing. Sometimes in this type of Buddhism, they'll view intercourse as a joint meditation that releases some special energy. It's not a normal practice in Northern Buddhism. It's really rare, and it's considered to be something that's dangerous and only for the super advanced. The Dalai Lama has publicly stated that he believes that this is a spiritual practice that can help one to gain enlightenment, but he thinks it's so dangerous that, maybe there's nobody or maybe just very few people who are advanced enough to actually use it. It's basically a kind of sexual magic, but not a kind of magic that everyone is qualified to use. How then does Buddhism view women in general? Well, traditionally, and in Southern Buddhism, they're seen as a source of desire, a source of craving, and so a cause of suffering, a major cause of suffering. And it has been assumed by some that rebirth as a female is, all things being equal, less desirable. Sometimes they would assume that enlightenment required being reborn as a male. Of course, it's impossible to take a completely negative view of women. Married women in this kind of Buddhism have always been respected as paragons of motherhood. How could there be a long-lasting world religion that didn't uphold the virtues of motherhood? In schools of Buddhism where there's some easy practice by which even lay people can quickly gain nirvana or at least get to the Pure Land, well, women have access to that as well. And as we mentioned in some Mahayana sutras, sex and gender differences are declared to be illusory or empty and are really minimized. Current-day Western Buddhists are strongly egalitarian, just like Western culture generally after World War II. Among Westerners outside of Asia, so in Europe and North America, for instance, Buddhist centers are often led by women, and women can function as gurus. Women can give Dharma talks and so on. So there's quite a wide variation, and there's a pretty big difference in traditional Asian practices and Buddhism as practiced outside of Asia in recent times. In our next segment, we'll look at some Buddhist devotional practices.